I say it's a long time since you and I were ever in touch.
It is, isn't it? It's the nice thing is, John, I still have a picture of you in my mind as you were then.
Oh dear. So
Sure if
you
it's the
didn't
same.
recognize me today, I take it.
Well, I can make a connection there, but you've got to use your imagination a little bit.
Absolutely.
So, remind me then, John. So you were in Kentish Town,
That's correct. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
not for long. Well,
7
I was
years.
there.
7 years.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So I obviously came after that, and then you went to Liverpool.
I went to Liverpool just for 5 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
To Bethel Church, where John Brencher had been before me. Um, and then I joined Africa Inland Mission on their home
Yes.
staff
Mm.
for 15 years.
Right.
Yeah. But I think you came to London the year after I did, but you're still in Childs Hill.
Yes. Not long now, but yeah. It's over 40 years, yes. I always like to say man and boy, I always
Man
say.
and boy, okay. It is unusual these days for a lifetime in one pastorate, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's got pros and cons.
Sure.
I haven't really, because, as you know, London life is very rapidly changing. So, there's nobody in the church who called me. They've all moved on or with the Lord, whatever. So,
Yeah.
so it's not quite like preaching to the same people
Yes.
40 years. It's a little
Yeah.
bit different to that, but yeah.
Yeah, the population turns over. I mean, when I was in Kentish Town, there were one or two stalwarts, but basically the congregation changed
Yeah,
completely within 7 years.
yeah. I think
Yeah,
that is London life, and
it is.
sure,
Yeah,
it's true in other places, but particularly in London.
sure.
It's so.
Has it become, is it much more multicultural than it was when you went? Is that a big difference too?
Yes, I mean it was more multicultural than I was used to when I got here, but since then it's got even more. So we've had this. There's a hotel around the corner that takes refugees, and so a lot of Iranians have found their way to us, and
Yeah.
rightly or wrongly, they've been welcomed into membership. Um, and there must be about 14. There were only about 40, the whole congregation, the whole membership, but about 14 of them are Iranians. There's a young woman from Pakistan and a man from Afghanistan as well. So,
Right.
you can't preach and say, remember when you were in Sunday school?
No,
It's not going to work.
absolutely.
It doesn't
Absolutely.
ring any bells. So, and
Yeah.
the singing is appalling.
Is it because they don't know the hymns or so on?
Yeah, they
Yes.
don't know them, and they don't seem to, the ones we've got anyway, don't seem to be of a particularly musical culture. So, yeah, it's
They would have no church background at all, I take
that's
it.
it. Nothing,
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, if the few that have had some background would be house churches. That's all
Right.
they've ever known. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
There's a large Iranian community in Glasgow, I know, with all the Tron Church where Eric Alexander was years ago and so on. They've almost, I'm not sure whether it's a separate church now, but it's been a whole community within the Tron Church because of the large Iranian community there.
Yes. Well, you're aware, the Glasgow Council at some point said we'll accept any refugee and give them a house.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they're beginning to wonder if they can go on like this.
Yes.
But yeah, they have that. I don't know how long they've had that policy, but it means to say a lot of refugees find their way to Glasgow.
Yeah,
So.
inevitably. Yeah, inevitably. So Gary, thank you. It's great to touch base with you again. Thank you for taking time this afternoon
Thank you. Yeah.
to talk with me on this. Just let's go back. How did you when and how did you sort of sense God was calling you to be a preacher?
Well, it was a long time ago, so it's hard to remember. I was not from a Christian home. It was a moral home, and they were very sympathetic to things Christian, but they weren't actually believers. My parents, and yet I was converted. But by the time I was nearly 13. I think that's when I was converted. Chapel around the corner, and so pretty early on. I think by the time I was 14, I felt called to the ministry. Now, what do you mean by that? Um, well, first of all, I thought all Christians must go through this. All Christians must feel that they want to preach, and obviously we're not all called. But I did feel it was my conviction. Now, I think one of the things that helped was that I didn't really know what a minister was. I have two sons in the ministry, and it's been a much more difficult thing for them knowing what a minister is
Yes, yes.
to come to that point. But yeah, I from that early age, I felt it was God's call, and I've tried to examine that, and I find it very difficult to examine it because if I take the stance and say, "Oh well, it could be just your imagination, it could be just something you thought up yourself," everything in me rebels against that. Although I can see how it's quite unsatisfactory to say, well, I just felt called. But I did, and I still do, and I think also without that, there's always that temptation then to step down. I think you think,
Mm,
well, I don't have to do this. Whereas I don't feel like I've never felt like I've always felt like this is what I must do. So
mhm.
that yeah, so I can see the danger of sort of being mystical, and I'm a Welshman, so that probably adds to it. But I'm not a particularly mystical person. I often say I only believe in angels because I must believe in angels because they're in the Bible. I'm not predisposed to thinking that way, so I'm not a mystical person. But I suppose what I'm saying is I felt right from 14 that God wanted me to be a preacher. I mean, I couldn't speak in public when I when
Mhm.
I first felt this. My pastor rather foolishly put me in the pulpit when I was 15.
Well,
I think he was hoping we had another Spurgeon on our hands, but it quickly became apparent that that was not the case. I was not capable of really communicating to a crowd.
interesting. Yeah.
For several years, sadly.
Yes.
Yeah, a friend of
Yeah.
mine used to ferry me about preaching in different churches, and well, he said to me once, he said, "Well, you seem so sure," and I was thinking, "Oh dear, this is just awful." But I think you find a way through. Then, if you're convinced, then that you ought to speak to people in
Mhm.
that way, then you find a way to
To do
communicate.
it.
If it makes sense, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. If you don't have that basic sense of call, however you describe it, uh, it's too easy to throw the towel in when
Mm.
life gets a bit challenging because it was your idea and I might as well change
Well,
my.
yeah, you can just drop it then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Another interesting thing that I've often thought about, but really haven't come to firm conclusions on. I do wonder if the call to the ministry comes with conversion.
Hmm.
Um, Now, obviously, there are people that don't become ministers until sometime later after they've been converted. And I'm not saying that they've been bad boys, that they should have listened earlier. I'm just saying that I think it does, if you examine your experience, you'll probably find that right from the word go,
Mm.
yeah. I mean,
Hmm.
I'm not prepared to die for that belief,
Hmm.
but I think that it probably is the case.
I think
Is it
sorry, go
I was
on.
going to say, I think it's Ed Clowney talks about your first name and your surname. That does it that way. So you've got
Okay, yeah,
I can't remember which way around it is now.
right.
You become a Christian. I think that must be your surname.
Yes, yeah,
Then what are
yeah,
you going to do in the kingdom? Yeah.
yeah. I think that's interesting because in this series, I've interviewed probably 50, 55 guys
Mm,
now. And the number of them, when you ask them, they say, "Oh, I was convinced I was going to be a preacher almost from day one,"
mm.
which I hadn't really come across before. But
No.
almost, as soon as I became a Christian, I knew I've got to spend my life now telling other people
Mm.
about this. So I
And
think
one or two unhappy about that. I remember. Yeah, I think John Marshall. I remember John Marshall, who was at Hemel Hempstead for
yeah,
many years. I think he one of the reasons he didn't want to become a Christian is because he thought he might end up as a minister.
is that right?
That's
Was
interesting.
the cost worth it? Yeah, absolutely.
Mm, mm.
So Gary, who have been the main influences on you being a preacher? Who's been the role models and though I'm sure you haven't emulated anybody, but who have been those influences that have shaped you?
Well, obviously, I went to the local church. There was a man there called Derek Garwood who was a fine preacher, a faithful man. I think it took him a while to sort of work out. He began in the Brethren, so that always
Hmm.
makes it complicated if you feel a call to the ministry and you're from a Brethren background. And I think he slowly came to sort of Calvinistic conclusions. And then when the whole movement came along, this is the 70s. I grew up in the 70s. He wasn't quite sure, as I'm sure many were the same, how to handle that, what to do about
Mm,
it. He was a deeply flawed man in many ways. As I got to know him, he was not a perfect model by any means, but I learned so much from him, and he was a great blessing to me. And then after I'd grown up, this is in Cwmbran in South Wales, I went to university in Aberystwyth, and well, he became my father-in-law in the end. But at the time, he was just a fine preacher as far as I was concerned, Jeff Thomas.
yeah.
And in fact, it's very interesting, the providence of God. When I went to university, I'd been to a Baptist church. I thought, well, I wouldn't mind trying something different. Now I'm free for the next 3 years. And but when I turned up in Aberystwyth, there are lots of churches in Aberystwyth. They used to make this joke when I was a student. There's something like, I think it's 51 pubs and 50 churches there were in those days. And so one poor vicar hasn't got a pub. I say, oh no, 51 churches, 50 pubs. It must be that way around. Anyway, although there were a lot of churches, and I would have liked to try the Elim Pentecostal Church, but there was no minister there. And I knew enough then to realize I needed somebody to,
Hmm.
to feed me and to teach me. So I very reluctantly dragged myself along to the Baptist church on my first Sunday. And well, as they say, the rest is history. And it was a great time. And what Jeff did that my pastor at home didn't do was, so my pastor at home preached in a Spurgeonic way. Then he would
Hmm.
take texts, but Jeff would preach systematically through the books of the Bible. And we had a sort of little glut of, he took the little books like Jonah and the Song of Songs and Ruth and one or two others, as well as I think probably Romans. Um, so it was a real eye opener to see that you could do that with Scripture. You could work your way through it.
Hmm.
So definitely then those two early influences, and then you look about, you find. I mean, Stuart Olliott. He's in my head. He's your model preacher. This
Yes,
is
yes.
this is how to do it. Now
Absolutely.
we can't all be Stuart Olliott. Probably wouldn't be a good idea if we were all Stuart
No.
Olliott. But for simplicity,
Yes.
directness,
Yeah.
thoroughness,
Yeah.
conviction, I think he
Yeah.
he really is a great blessing to his generation. And I always listen to him with brother. And then he's got this little book, hasn't he? Preaching pure and simple. And
Yes. Yes.
I
Yeah.
I don't follow it to the letter, but I do. Yeah, that's my
Yeah. It
yeah
seems effortless with Stuart somehow. It's I think he's the most natural preacher I've ever come across in
yeah
that sense. Some of us have to work hard at it, but it just
yes.
seems to come easily. Yeah. But
Although I fancy he's a bit like the swan, really. I think
I'm sure
he's
you're right.
he's gracefully
Yes.
sailing through it. But if you sort of look, I'm sure he's pedaling like mad, or has been
That's
pedaling like
me.
mad to
Yeah.
get to
Yeah.
where he
Yeah.
is. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I spoke to your father-in-law last year sometime on this
I
series
thought
and
so.
hugely enjoyed it, of course. But I was thinking, I mean, 50 years in Aberystwyth, he must have preached through most of the Bible systematically.
He did, although there are the way he did it, there are lacunae. Then so there are one or two things he missed in a way that I found. I've preached on nearly everything over 40 years. There
Mm.
are one or two things I've missed. I mean, I discovered a few months ago that I'd actually not preached on the final part of Leviticus, not because I've got any problem with it. I just forgot. It was a midweek meeting series, and so I'd taken a break, and then so there are a few things
Sure.
that haven't been covered, but yeah, but Jeff says, doesn't he? I think he says you paint yourself into a corner. So
Yes, yes.
you, well, I'm going through 2 Chronicles at the moment on a Sunday evening, and I don't feel I'm in a corner at all. I'm partly thinking, well, I should have got to this sooner, really, but
Yes, yes.
yeah.
And what I love too about people like Stuart and Jeff is they're still going strong and faithful.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah, it
wonderful.
is. So
Wonderful.
impressive.
Yeah.
I really don't feel like that myself. I'm younger than those two, but oh my, I
Uh,
do feel really quite tired sometimes. But there we are. We're all different. We're all different.
Absolutely. And I was just realizing recently that there's Dick Lucas just celebrated his 100th.
100th birthday,
Yeah,
amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
incredible. Yeah.
Yes. Now that's somebody I've benefited from. I wouldn't have.
Yes.
He wouldn't be a model for me for
No, I
various
know.
reasons, but yeah, I think his approach to things is it's been a blessing to be here in London and to listen. Yeah, yeah. I used to. There was a time when I would go. Which order was it now? There would be the Evangelical Ministry Assembly. I think it was that order with Dick Lucas.
Yes.
And then the Metropolitan Tabernacle School of Theology. I mean, very contrasting
Yeah, very good.
conferences, and only one or two of us in both. And yet they were really often saying similar things. I remember a moment when Dick Lucas held up to us Peter Master's book, The Healing Epidemic, and he was saying what a wonderful book it was. And I thought, yes, they're really at opposite ends of the spectrum, and yet, uh, yeah,
Yes.
so great privilege to be here in London
Yeah.
to
Well, I
hear.
used to go to when I was at, I think he called them expositions for
That's
expositors.
it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
So
so you were
I
there.
used to call them the Danish pastry sessions because the catering
Well,
was always
yes,
superb. But
that was one of the outstanding features of those.
they were master classes
They
in,
really were. Yeah.
with the greatest respect to a giant like Lucas. I know this is going to be broadcast, but I don't think he's the best preacher in the world,
No,
but
no,
he's a
don't think so.
brilliant expositor.
Yes, yes, yeah.
And I think that, that's the distinction I would make. And that's not to take anything away from him at
Oh no,
all,
no, no, no.
but
No. I was also disappointed with the way he read scripture. I don't know. He seemed to read it as though, well, we need to go through this before we get to the main thing. And I've always tried to read scripture to preach it, really. And
Mhm.
I was a little bit hung up at first. I would only read it, not say anything from myself. But at some point, I think it was because we've always had. I read. I'm a big fan of the NIV. Whether that makes you switch off or not, I'm not sure. But one of the things I read in the NIV is Paul saying to Timothy, "Give yourself to the public reading of Scripture," because it's just reading in the old versions, and so
Mhm.
that really, I thought, well, yes, we should be doing more of that because you tend to think, well, they've got Bibles at home, they can read them. But I think public reading of scripture is important. So I've always tried to include
Yeah.
what's the correct term then? Um, the lectio. Oh, I can't remember the term now. But to have a reading, and I think it was reading through Ezekiel that concluded that led me to the conclusion where I need to say something about
Okay.
these
Yeah.
verses, not just read it. So
Yes.
I tried to do that, and I tried to not preach it, to speak the scriptures as I might go about preaching,
Yeah.
and
It's
I think that is probably the way
hmm
to do it, really.
Yeah. No, with you. I'm with you. Gary, looking back on your ministry, what advice would you now give your younger self?
I don't know. I don't know. Keep going. I would say that keep going. That's important. Not to get too discouraged. Not to make too big a deal of things. We tend to dramatize things, or I do anyway. Um, just I remember asking uh, a congregate, asking a minister's fraternal, what how do you love the people? It's very difficult to really feel for the people. And several things were said in response to that. But I do remember Paul Cook, some of you remember Paul Cook,
Mm-hmm.
saying, "Don't take yourself too seriously." And I thought, yeah, it sounds wrong at first because
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
this is the most serious work there is. Yeah, we'll take the work
Mm-hmm.
seriously, but don't take yourself
Yes.
too
Yes.
seriously. You've got to recognize you're just one man, one congregation, it's one sermon. You've got to see it. I think in those sort of terms. Otherwise, well, some of us will get so obsessed and go crazy because we're just not just line up, just remember, it
Hmm.
is.
Hmm.
So that I thought that was helpful advice, and I'd probably pass that on to my younger, uh, not, unbald self, ungrayed self.
So, as you sort of take stock of the current situation in preaching, what encourages you? What are the positives, and what bothers you? Where do you think are the weak spots?
Well, I think it's often the case, isn't it, where the strong things are the weak things.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
people are now convinced that you can't just stand there and say whatever comes into your head. I think that era, there are still one or two little places where that is
mhm,
allowable, but I think most people have realized you've really got to put some effort into this. You've got to study hard, you've got to take time, you've got to prepare well. And I think that's a good thing. That can only be a good thing in and of itself, so that people really are working hard in preparing their sermons and so on. But then that also then I think is a weakness, because you've got this situation that appears to exist where um, young men, for example, uh, don't feel they can give you two sermons on a Sunday. They can only really manage one, and I think they come to that conclusion because they're putting in so many
mhm.
hours into preparing the sermons, and they feel, well, they should all be of the same high standard, and so they just feel they can't do it, and so they're very happy if there is a co-pastorate or something of that nature, or if there are elders that preach and so on. And so I think what is actually a strength that then becomes a
Yes,
weakness,
yeah.
because there's an over idealizing of things. I think also some of the things that are said in sermons, they're interesting to preachers, but they're not very interesting or helpful even. Chiasmus, wonderful discovery. Whoever spotted that there are these wonderful chiasma, I suppose it must be the plural. But I think it's very rare that telling a congregation that is going to help them. I mean, sometimes you can make a point, because sometimes you know how they divide it up and they say, well, look, this is the central verse here,
Sure.
and that may well be the case, and perhaps it is useful to know that. But sometimes I think you're telling a congregation something that they don't find particularly interesting. I don't think that in many cases will be particularly helpful
Hmm.
for them.
Hmm.
I mean, as a general, like most preachers, I don't get to hear much preaching. I know you can listen to things online and so on, but I don't seem to. My lifestyle doesn't seem to sort of lead me to much of that. That's probably my fault rather than anybody else's. But uh, I do wonder if preachers are preaching to the congregation they wish they had,
Hmm.
other than the congregation that they actually have.
Yeah.
I've noticed it in my own congregation, because we had this influx of Iranian. They're not all refugees, but mostly refugees, and in many cases, the English is very poor, very. So we have tried to help them with translation and so on, but I think you've got to, well, two things. You've got to assume nothing,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, and you have got to make it as simple as you possibly can. And that has affected my preaching, I would think, um, quite a bit.
Hmm.
Certainly, I think I preached shorter sermons than I did. I think I always wanted to preach shorter sermons, but I was a little bit afraid. Are you really orthodox if you're under 30 minutes? So yeah, they've certainly got shorter. I hope they've got simpler, and so I think sometimes that is not really taking into account, and we're still preaching the sermons, as I say, for the congregations we wish we had.
Hmm. 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 And I think that's even more true with the post-COVID live stream, because I'm also thinking, well, people are going to watch this on YouTube or whatever, and
Well, yes, yes,
and
yeah,
forget
there
who's sitting
may
in
be.
front of me. You
Yeah. Oh
know?
no, you haven't. These days you don't know who might
Yeah,
tune in, who might be listening. So you have got to allow a little bit of leeway for that. But I
sure.
think practically, you really ought to be preaching to the people in front of you
Yeah.
rather than the people who might happen to tune in or who might read it online later or something.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. What aspect of preaching, in terms of study preparation, all the way through to delivery, what aspect do you find the most demanding personally, most stretching? And has it changed over the years?
Yeah, I think it's probably changed. At the beginning, you don't know your way around the Bible as well, perhaps as you should. You don't know which commentaries are going to help you and
Hmm.
which ones are going to be a waste of time. So a lot of time goes into finding that out and getting a better understanding. After a while, then obviously you visited uh, the passages before, so you're not so much hung up about that. I mean, they always tell you, they always say you're supposed to, write the sermon and then look at the commentaries. Wow.
Hmm.
When I was a young man, I never, well, not never did that, but I almost never did that. Because I often didn't have a clue where I was going to go anyway. So I needed to read the commentaries first of all. And then, as time has gone on, as I say, you get to know things better. And so sometimes I don't look at the commentaries at all. That's probably a fault in the other direction, really. I mean, we ought to just check to make sure you've got things right. And so, yeah. So the early on, the difficulty, well, two difficulties really. One actually knowing what the passage means and teacher, I'm about doing a series on Galatians once. I don't know at what point, but one week I ducked out. I just couldn't. I didn't have a clue what Paul was saying. So I thought, oh well, we'll do something else this week and move on. That happened. That doesn't happen really in the same way anymore. So there's the actual exegesis, and then the time for things. You see, because if you are doing three messages a week, that is quite demanding. I became a pastor when I was 24, and I didn't know anything really about the ministry, apart from what I sort of picked up, and so I thought I was going to write some poetry and do this and do that, but really. Three messages. In seminary, we were doing an essay every 2 weeks, plus obviously your Greek and Hebrew and so on. So then suddenly you're basically doing three essays a week there, aren't
Hmm.
you? If you,
Hmm.
I mean, I know midweek you is a different thing, but it is, and I found that very very demanding in those days, which in a way that I don't find so now. So the thing then later on, then it's illustration, isn't it? How to make it interesting and to bring it home. And I think the internet's a wonderful thing. The internet's a great help to to illustrate. Again, it's like everything else. You've got to be careful because sometimes you've got too much information. You just copy it and paste it into your manuscript, and they don't want to know all the details. Journalists always give the age of whoever's
Yes.
involved. They don't care
Who
what age
cares?
the person was. You don't need that detail. So you've got to be careful. But
Yes.
I think it is a great help. And I think that our illustration, and not just illustration, but the sort of background and the application, I think those things are hard to to do well. Uh,
Mm.
but that's the sort of thing I think we've got to work on once we feel the exegesis is in place. Yeah. Mm.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Supposing a young guy comes to you and says, Pastor Gary, I think God may be calling me to be a preacher.
Mm.
What advice would you give him? How would you start him off or not start him off on that road?
I'd get him to read the Bible. That sounds like an obvious
Radical.
thing, but I when I went for my interview at the seminary, it seemed to me one of the questions that they ought to ask me and that they never did, and that I was afraid they would ask me is, "Have you read the Bible?" Because at that stage, what was I, 23, 20, 22? Uh, I had not read the whole Bible. In fact, it came as a a sort of revelation to me when I got to university, and there was this fellow, and he had this weird idea that you read 4 chapters of the Bible every day. Crazy. I mean, how could that possibly be done? I was still on, daily bread or something similar. You just read a little passage, and that was it. And when you'd actually read the whole Bible, that was a sort of a little, goal in the future. So I would begin now. I say,
Mm.
read the book, but make sure you've read the whole Bible. I would encourage him to use, if not McShane's can be sometimes a bit too demanding. But Bible in 1 year at the very
Hmm.
least. Get to know your Bible, and that's probably where I think I would begin, and obviously introducing them to the fact that there is such a thing as systematic theology. Again, a student experience. I never forget when the Banner of Truth used to do this sort of. They used to sell off their soiled copies, or soiled is not perhaps the right word, but some of the stock had got a little bit
Okay.
damaged, so they sell it off to cheap prices to the students. And I remember getting this Burkhoff's systematic theology, and I really knew nothing about the subject. So I don't know, got this big book, isn't it? So I'm lying on my bed. It's very difficult to put that stuff to reading this stuff about God. Well, I knew it was right. I sort of half knew that, but I never ever thought about God. To go through it systematically. What is he like? What are his attributes? It was such a wonderful experience, and I think that for various reasons, a lot of people don't know about that. And if a man's going to be a minister, then I think he'll be very pleased to know that that exists, and
Mm.
want to
Hmm.
develop his own systematic theology, because I think you've got to have that. I mean, we've all got one, uh,
Yes.
whether
Yes.
we know it or not, a systematic way of thinking. But you do need that. I would encourage them to read those, to discover those things.
Sure.
Really, yeah,
Yeah. I come across guys today who've never heard of Burkhoff, which just makes me feel
yeah,
old. That's the problem.
yeah. No, that's it. Yeah, old Burkhoff was. I mean, there are others have come
Yes.
out. I know there are others that, but yeah, it's Burkhoff. I certainly began with, and
Yeah.
probably haven't got much further than.
That was the go-to one in my day. Certainly. Yeah.
Mm.
Were you LTS? Is that where you studied?
Yeah, so that's what I did. I did the 3 years in Aberystwyth, and then I was still very young, so I thought I ought to be qualified to do something rather than. So I did a teacher training course at Cardiff
Hmm.
University, and then yeah, I thought I'd heard about Westminster. I thought I would have loved to go there, but it didn't seem to be any way forward for that. And then I heard about the London Theological Seminary. It was in about its 6th or 7th year at the time, and it looked to me like yeah, just the thing. And
Hmm.
so I very happily came along here to London, not realizing I was going to be stuck in London for the
Steve.
next 40 years. But yeah, I loved the
Yeah.
call, loved the whole thing. It was great.
That was then Howell Jones was there. Was that right?
Yeah, well, it was all Welshmen at the time.
Yes.
It was
Yeah.
Philip Eveson, Hal Jones, Andrew Davis, and Graham
Yes.
Harrison. So
Yes.
there was hardly a non-Welshman there. But
It wasn't a great culture shock for you then.
well, there was that. Although London itself, oh my,
Yes.
what I mean, it was took me a few weeks. I thought, it doesn't rain. It does rain, but not so often.
Yeah.
Uh, and I didn't know what to look at. When you look out of the window, what do you look at? Because at home you looked at the mountain. There it was, and
Yes. Not
so
many of those in
yeah,
London.
lots of. And the other thing, I thought Londoners were rather blasé. They just. But I think what it is, if you're in London, I presume every week, great preachers must be coming through, and great everything else. But
Okay.
you can't get excited. I mean, if you live in, I don't know, the back of beyond, and somebody comes along, you get excited. They're coming, and
It's a big deal.
well, you can't do that in London. It's just constantly there's
Yeah.
things on. So I've learned to be blasé. Well, I hope I'm not blasé, but there we are.
Wonderful, wonderful. Guy, just one more question I've been asking guys in recent weeks. Is there one book on preaching that has helped you most or you would recommend? I know that probably changes different times in our lives, but is there one book on preaching you think everybody should read?
Yeah, there have been books that I've benefited from that I wouldn't sort of say you've got to read. I mean, it's funny little book is Thoughts on Preaching by now which of the Alexanders is it?
Hmm.
Because he never got round to writing the book. He just wrote down
Is that
notes.
right?
The notes are just fascinating. Yeah, I love that book. And is it Haddon Robinson
Hmm.
as well? And more recently, then anyway. But I would, as I mentioned before, Preaching Pure and Simple by Stuart
Yeah,
Hall, just
that's got it all there. Yeah.
excellent. I just really. And of course, preaching and if I sat down to read a book with somebody who's thinking about preaching, I'd read Preaching and
Yeah.
Preachers by Lloyd Jones.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, again, I think that's very important because it's easy to get the wrong idea of preaching, to think it's all about getting your exegesis right and so
Mm.
on. But I think Lloyd Jones's approach is really so helpful. I mean, obviously Spurgeon's lectures. Yeah, good fun, a great read, just full of sane, sensible. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That's good. Gary, thank you so much. It's been a genuine delight to talk with you again. Um,
I've enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you
I,
very much.
I haven't been in the big smoke for many years now, but I don't know how much longer you're going to be there. But have you
Well,
got
not much
plans?
longer if plans go as we hope. I'm hoping that we'll be able to move to Cardiff in about a year's time, I
Okay.
suppose. A little bit less than that. Thank you for inviting me. I really I hope you'll be able to put something together from it.
I'll manage. Don't worry, Gary. Lord bless you, my brother. Thanks again.
God bless. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.